Hey all, Dave the train guy from the Hobby Man by Hearns. Today we're about to embark on Hornby Project TT 120. Now this is a new scale that's come onto the market and it's a bit of a seismic shift in terms of scale, and it's an exciting time because for a lot of you out there that always put off buying or building a train set or building a model railway, will now actually have the opportunity to actually build a model railway in a fairly confined sort of a space. Whether you want to build a railway that can fit under a bed or into a study or into a small bedroom, an office if need be, TT will allow you to do that. And because of its smaller scale, being 1 to 20, it allows that, so you can get a lot more model railway into a confined area. And just to prove the point, with the latest set and all the sets, they only have a footprint, and I'll bring it around. Yeah, there we go. They have a size footprint, and this is using their recommended track mat of 1371 mils that way and 940 mils that way. So if this was to have to fit under a bed, like a child's bed in the bedroom, I think you could pretty well do that if it was on casters. But anyway, as you may have seen recently, we've done a lot of lead up videos on the presentation of Hornby TT, and there'll be much more to follow. There'll be the Easterner, which is shortly about to arrive, and other items of rolling stock track pack. So it's going to be a pretty exciting time with things unrolling as time moves on. But anyway, today's video is just purely about getting started. Now we're doing this on the assumption that you've never ever built a model railway, or you've been a member of a model railway club and you just don't know where to start. So we'll just go through some of the basics. And to accompany everything we're going to do today, we're actually got we'll just do a rough track module just to show you the steps on the basics. Now, you have your set. You've been running that around for a while and you're pretty happy with it. But you're probably thinking, oh, I want to make it a little bit more interesting. It doesn't really look that exciting running around on the kitchen table or on the floor. Actually, don't run it on the floor at all, please. Little motors don't like dust or hair. And it might be the starting point to building your layout. Now, to start with your layout, you would have to have a base. So, hence, you're going to need some timber, not wood, timber. So, with those measurements we just mentioned, you could possibly just build a light pine frame, like a ridge or a square. And we might actually come up with some drawings for that. Just like 2x1 pine, just to make it rigid. And you can say, for example, use marine ply. So if you go to one of your big hardware retailers, you can get marine ply timber, or you could use something like what we're using today, solid pine, which is very sturdy, because what you want is not to have anything flex. So if you can imagine, for example, if this was to mount it on a table, and because of its small size, you don't really need to build legs. You could actually probably build a layout that could sit on a table, or something you could buy from an office work supply store, or a kitchen table, or you could even put it on casters like I just mentioned. You could build a frame, say under here, some casters in the corners, and you could have it so you could roll it under a bed. Now, most kids, once upon a time, used to have layouts that used to roll under beds. Okay. The things you probably would need is a cordless drill. I think most people have that. Some driver bits, some maybe 2-inch self-drilling timber screws, some PVA, timber wood glue, white glue, and a saw, maybe a jigsaw, and you'll be off and running. And you'd probably want to get lengths of timber that would be as close as you can get to those dimensions of 1.3 if you're going to build a basic size layout. Now, we're only talking in terms of being true to TT and building a very compact but a very sort of interesting layout in a given confined space. Okay, on to the next bit. This is where the excitement starts. So you've got your base, we'll start laying track. Now, if it's going to be a little bit more elaborate than just a basic oval, you may want to sit down and actually draw up a plan. Now, you're probably going to find what you have in your head is going to be a lot more complicated or not as durable as what it would be to actually build. You're probably going to have loops within loops and all sorts of complicated scenarios with trains going up really steep gradients and so forth. So I would probably suggest, yeah, sit down with pen and paper, just try to nut it out. There are programs you can get, or you could even use the up-and-coming track packs that will be coming from Hornby, which would make it easy and simple, and just stick with those because they'll be at set radiuses, they'll have points in place, there'll be loops and so forth, crossings. Okay, now we have our base down. You'd want to probably start thinking about laying your track. Now, one of the things I would always probably suggest is you lay your track on a base. And we have a piece of TT track here. Actually, correction, that's a piece of N-scale track. Actually, before we go any further, maybe we might just go over the size differences. This piece here is HO track, HOOO, which is 16.5 mil, so it's the distance between the rails. We have TT beside it, which is 12 mil. Then we have N scale, which is 9 mil. So you can sort of see the differences. So obviously you're going to get a lot more layup with your TT, and you will get a lot with your N scale. But the downside with N scale is probably the size can make it fiddly. TT is a beautiful sweet spot in terms of scales because it's not too large and it's not too small. You're not obscuring detail, and it's easy to handle. So if your eyesight's not quite as good as it used to be, or you've got two thumbs, TT might be the way to go. Anyway, moving along. What I would always suggest when you're laying your track is not to have it laid directly onto the substrate or the surface. It would look a lot better if it was elevated on a track shoulder. And at this stage, I'm not aware of anyone doing foam underlay for TT, but that's not a problem because you can just use cork. Now, cork is will give you the effect, if you just cut it to the edge, just to the side there, it'll give you a track shoulder. So what I'll do, if you just bear with me for a moment, I'll cut off a strip too and I'll show you what I mean. And I'll try not to stick my tongue out. Another thing it might be very handy to have is a really good work knife, and make sure it's got a nice sharp blade. A sharp blade's actually safer than a blunt blade. Okay, now this is what I was just referring to, like that's... Yeah, that's the sort of probably the ratio between the edge of the sleepers to the edge of the cork. Now, when that's laid down, not only does it reduce the sound effect, but it actually gives you the effect that the railway is actually laid on stones or ballast, crushed rock. Now I've just lost my little mark here. Just using a bit of white glue. Now this is a bit of PVA. Now most of the time it doesn't really matter whose glue you're going to use. It's just a water-based soluble PVA. And you probably find most of the time it'll be touch dry in about 30 minutes. That's probably full strength after about 3 hours. Yeah, we'll just give it a decent smear. You don't want it like dog curling up, getting all dog-eared on the edges. just for the purpose of our demonstration. Now, one of the benefits of working with PVA too, it's water soluble, so if you get it on your fingers or, God forbid, spill it on the floor, you'll be safe. Alright, now, as you can see, where are we? Code 80 track, it lines up quite nicely. Nice and easy. And this is a middle-aged man with failing eyesight can still do that. Right, now we'll just continue on a little bit here. Just work to the original track plan. Alright, so we want to go this way now. Now you may, with those with a keen eye, may see that we've actually made allowances here for insulated track joiners. So we're not doing that today. It's not going to be a DCC digital ready layout. It'll just be a direct current DC layout. Now we'll just continue on. There we go, a bit better. Just to prove that it doesn't always go perfect the first time, and if you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. As evident by this. All right, so now we've got our cork roughly worked out to where we want it. Now, things to remember. You may want to put a point motor here at one stage, because this point or turnout, depending on whose terminology you want to use, you may want to motorize it. And that would be like a little Pico point motor, and that's something, or a DCC Concepts digital point motor. These will be things that we'll explain later on as this series continues. There is a little provision there for a point motor, which would be a little pin that would stick up through there, which would change your blades. Now, consideration point would be if once you've worked out your track plan and you've loosely laid it all out, and you don't get any of these sort of like ugly like joins. Now I don't know if you can see that, but if, say for example, you were to connect all your track up, you had a great big gap between two rails, you'd probably want to go back and just readjust it. Make sure it's all adjusted first, make sure it all works, test it. Also check the conductivity of it all, make sure that everything's getting power that should have power, because the last thing you want to do is actually pin it all down, nail it all down, ballast it, paint it, whatever, and then find that your engine's stop, or you're not getting electricity to where you need to get electricity, in layman terms. But going back to my first point, there might be some consideration too if you do want to use point motors, and you don't have to, but it's nice to have. You may want an automated layout where you just sit back and you just control the whole lot from the corner, and you don't have to touch anything. You don't have to go around flicking points like that. Although one of the points with TT is because it is so compact, and you can have a large layout or an interesting full-on layout. It's very playable, and it's a confined area. You may not want to have point motors, but some people do. So it's a consideration. If that is the case, again, mark it out as to where the point is going to go, or the turnout's going to go, and drill, say, approximately an 8mm, 9mm hole, and just test fit the point motor. Make sure that you can position it under that point, and that'll be under the layout itself. So say, for example, if it was elevated, and your layout will need to be elevated if you're going to run point motors that are mounted beneath your layout, and just for illustration purposes, yeah, if it was to be mounted under here, you're going to have a bit of a space. So make sure there's no timber frames running this way or that way that are going to interfere with the point motor. And with that too, you're going to have to wire them up, so it'll be wires passing under the underside of your layout. Just a consideration, but yeah, remember to drill the holes for your points. Otherwise, it's a bit hard to do it after the event. So, okay, so once we've got our track all worked out as to where we want it to go, you can actually, at this stage, if you wish, and you don't have to do it, again, it's nice to do, and it's something I like to do, because I think it just adds to the realism, is to paint the sides of your rails. Now, in real life, you will not see bright, chromy, highly polished looking steel rails on a railway. Now you've got nice looking engines, you've got nice looking rolling stock, and you're going to do a fantastic job on the scenery. You're going to have some really nice houses, buildings, cottages, castles, people, vehicles, and it might just be let down a little bit by the fact that the sides of your rails are all very nickel silver looking. So what I would suggest is and there's a couple of ways you can go about this. You can either use acrylic paint, something like Tamiya, what do we got today? It's the first one I picked, Deck Brown or Flat Earth or something like that, and it doesn't really matter which color you use, because in real life you'll find all different shades of rust. Coming into work today on the train, I noticed it goes from brown, black to all variation shades of orangey, rusty browns, so it doesn't really matter. So just pick a collection of acrylic brown paint, something like your Tamiya paints, or you could use the Woodland Scenics track painter, which is like a felt tip biro, and you would run this along the sides of your track. You just run it along there, and that's another quick way to do it. It's effectively like a permanent texture in a reddy brown color. Now what I will do, I'll just give you a bit of a demo, and you can be the judge. Alright, we'll just paint a section here. And like I said, you could use any sort of reddy brown color as long as it's a flat. You don't want to have a glossy sort of effect. And the other thing is, if you get it on the heads of the rails, it's no big deal. You just use something like a PK track rubber to wipe it down. Now at this stage you can do this extra detailing, like I said, after, and I do stress test, test, test. Make sure it all works. Run some trains around it. If you do have to pin something down, maybe just pin it down with 1 or 2 track pins, but don't go crazy and start nailing things down till you know it all works, because it's a bit heartbreaking to see someone destroy their track because they didn't get it right to start with. Now there's not really a need to be all that accurate with the painting the sides of the rails at this stage. And if you wish to, another option too, I won't be doing it today, is to actually paint your sleepers, or just dry brush your sleepers with a bit of flat white or a light grey over the moulded brown colour that they come in, because that will also distract from the fact that the sleepers are a shiny plasticky colour. Again, you're working with some fantastically detailed rolling stock. It just looks all that much better if it's running on really detailed track. And I often feel sometimes that people sort of like forget about the track. Like I said, you could ballast it, you could put down the crushed rock onto and have your track all laid, but you'll still have those shiny rail sides showing through, which will detract from the effect you're trying to achieve. And like we remarked on some of our videos, the Flying Scotsman for example, has a lot of detail, and that's the first one I've seen to date. For the size of the model, it's got some brilliant detail. And to have that rolling over bright silver rails just doesn't look right to me. Personally, my opinion, but I think you'll agree once we've done this. You'll see my point. Okay, we'll just do now. This is a tedious job, so like I said, the results will be worth it, although it can be tedious. But then, hey, you're dealing with TT, so it's not like you're doing the nullable in TT scale. Now, it's acrylic paint, so when it dries, it'll have a bit of a skin, but because it's going over nickel silver, it'll just scrape off in its tacky stage. And I would probably try to clean as you go, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world. You can just use something like I mentioned before, a Pico track rubber to clean it up. Or you could even have a little bit of methylated spirits wrapped around your thumb and just run it along the tops here. But please do not use wet and dry sandpaper to clean your rail tops. Don't scratch your rail surface. Keeping in mind too that you only have a small surface area which needs to go to your wheels, which supplies the power to your little motor, which needs to come up from the rail head into the wheels and onto the model. Okay, so just like I said, it's water wash up, so mums and dads out there, your children aren't working with anything toxic if they choose to do this themselves. Now that's still drying, but to me, it looks like real railway rail. I don't know if the camera's picking that up, but that rusty brown effect looks good. Now I've got another shade of brown here. Like I said, you could probably use light grey or white, but you only need to dry brush it. And I'm just looking at that track now. It looks quite shiny. I mean, you can see a timber green in it. And if you were just to use the smallest amount of paint, just the smallest amount, and you don't have to paint it, you don't have to be really precise. All you want to do is just effectively just kill that sheen. And the great thing about model railway is that without you even realizing it, you're going to develop so many skills and learn so much without even realizing it. Things like carpentry, if you've never done anything with carpentry before, and you don't need to be a carpenter, if you can squeeze the trigger on a cordless drill, or you can draw a straight line with a ruler, or use a tape measure, you're going to be right. A lot of people may feel they might be DIY challenged, but you will learn so much as you go. Just the basics of like working with wiring, color matching. You'll probably become a lot more observant about the world around you. You probably won't look at trains the same way ever again, that's true. Even social history. And I promise you won't become a nerd. So he says. Now, just as I'm doing this, and you may not see it, but there's actually little pinholes here. 1, 2, 3. And we'll come to that in a minute. There we go. Now, like I said, if you get a bit of paint on the tops of the rails at the stage, it's not a problem because you'll be cleaning down the track. And it's going to get a lot more messy before you start running trains again at the stage. And like I said before, colours you can use would be like greys for your sleepers. Just dry brush it. So yeah, it does mean using much paint. Just use minimal amount of paint and just rub it back and forth. The effect is just to kill that sheen on the plastic. Although recycled plastic's now being used in railway sleepers. Well, in Australia it is, but I don't know whether it's going to look glossy. You really want that sort of like that aged timber effect with brake dust, cinders and grime and whatever's fallen out of wagons, or even out of passenger carriages if someone's gone to the WC. Only joking. Okay, now the paint's starting to dry, and the beauty of the acrylic paint is it only takes about 30 minutes to be touch dry. Now, I don't know if the camera's picking that up, but I've painted both sides, the outside and the inside. Don't cheat. You need to do the lot. Now, when it comes to your turnouts, there's a bit of a consideration here. And you're going to be a little bit slower, a little bit more mindful. It's okay for painting the outside. Going along here. Now, where you're going to be a little bit more mindful about what you're doing is this section here. Now, this blade here is for power routing, so I'll use this end of the paintbrush. Okay, so this part here and this blade here will be power routing. Do not get paint into here. Where are we? Yeah, this bit here. In there or in there. Otherwise, you're going to have some headaches. But like I said, it's not the end of the world. If it does, maybe just get a Q-Tex or a cotton bud, soak it in a little bit of methylated spirits, and you can actually soften up the acrylic paint, and that'll clean it up. But that's required for conductivity. So depending on which way the blades are set, that'll direct power up through to here. And probably another consideration too is when you are painting a point or a turnout, is probably just paint the outside of the frog up here. Now, a lot of people don't like the look of the big chunky bit of plastic there, and neither do I. But I think you can take a concession here and probably don't paint, where are we? Don't paint right inside. Only being is that once your trains are up and running, you don't want those metal wheels cutting into soft acrylic paint and carrying that around your layout and making your rails all dirty. So, and probably by now, because you've been painting so much track, you're probably actually going to get a pretty steady hand. And even if you don't have a steady hand, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really matter, because you don't need to be all that accurate. You're just creating an effect, so you're not doing a Picasso. Well, I suppose he was pretty crazy with his painting, but you'll get the idea of what I mean. You're basically just camouflaging that nickel silver rail. And I'm actually using a different shade of brown, which it doesn't matter because nothing in real life is consistently the same color anyway. So, it kills the uniformity of it all. And I'm just painting the bits on the side here, not actually the actual lever bit here itself. I'm just painting around it. Again, it's a personal preference, but I think it really does enhance your track if you are to paint it. Anyway, for the focus of our demonstration, we'll come back to this bit here. Well, okay, we've got our track painted, and we're assuming that we've tested it all. Our trains go around the track perfectly before we painted anything on. And we've just loosely laid our cork down. We can glue our cork down. Once we're happy with everything, the wiring works, the track works, our points work, one train can go from another track to another track without stalling or stopping. Get all those things sorted out before you go to the next stage of painting. So assuming we've done all that, we'll go on to the next bit in our next episode. So until next time, part 2, we'll start with the ballasting. All right, until then, have fun. See ya.